because intimacy isn't just physical. And then we experience these mini divorces or these anxiety spirals and all of this aftermath that God didn't intend for you to experience. Hey guys, welcome back to Out of Context, where we talk about everything going on in the world from a Christian Gen Z perspective. And today we're talking about situationships. I did a poll last week about situationships after a conversation I had with a friend, and I had thousands of responses from you guys. And I know that as someone who has gone through it on both the receiving and the person who caused it, it's something that I wish more people talked about. So today we're going to dive into situationships. Have you ever found yourself in a confusing gray zone or middle ground? You have lots of anxiety. You're texting someone every single day, but you're not really sure if they're interested or if it's going anywhere. You kind of talk about things that you wouldn't talk about with anyone else, and you share intimate parts of your life, or maybe you're just casually hanging out and kind of wondering if this is going to lead to a date or something, and you're just in this confusing middle stage. Well, you might be in a situationship. Now, I've been in more than I'd like to admit, unfortunately, but I want to share with you that this isn't God's plan for you. God is not a God of confusion, and He's a God of clarity. So the Bible doesn't talk about dating or situationships, but it does talk about marriage. And often dating and situationships are a marriage without a covenant. And we experience all the things that we would in a marriage, the level of emotional and physical intimacy, because intimacy isn't just physical. And then we experience these mini divorces or these anxiety spirals and all of this aftermath that God didn't intend for you to experience. So first, let's define what a situationship is. Now, I have two definitions. The first one is a situationship is a relationship without clarity or commitment. It could be as simple as texting every day without discussing where exactly you're going or if someone has some sort of interest. It could be as complicated as involving physical intimacy or not defining boundaries. The core issue often is that one person hopes for more while the other kind of just doesn't. Another definition is from the Urban Dictionary, which describes situationships as an emotional trauma in a gift box. We hear this even in pop culture from Sabrina Carpenter, who sings The Sharpest Tool, where she says, "If that was casual, then I'm an idiot." Slate magazine said that Gen Z is afflicted with an epidemic risk aversion. We have a lot of fear as a generation, with over 60% of Gen Z saying that they experience anxiety. According to another survey, over 50% of both Gen Z and millennials have experienced some sort of situationship, and I'm sure that number is higher. And it's not because Gen Z just doesn't want to commit. I think that that's the idea that maybe some older generations may have about Gen Z, and that's not the issue. According to another survey, 7 in 10 unmarried young adults say they want to get married. And in 2023, another survey found that only 8% of Gen Z believe that marriage was outdated. That means that 92% of Gen Z still see the value in marriage. At the core is there is a lot of fear in Gen Z. And for Christians, we know that God has not given us a spirit of fear. We know that in Christ there is peace, that there is boldness, that there is hope for the future. But yet a lot of Christians within the church still experience situationships. And I know that because I've experienced it firsthand as the epitome of a church kid. And also I talk to people who are pastors' kids, who are in church, who are newly saved, who have experienced this. And it's kind of just this silent epidemic that no one is talking about. It starts off super innocently often. You just start texting, and then before you know it, you're texting every day, and someone has cultivated some sort of feelings, or you're talking about the future, or sometimes it leads to crossing physical boundaries often. Vodi Bakum describes intimacy as information that's not readily available to someone else. So if you preface things by saying like, hey, don't tell anyone that I shared this with you, or hey, so I don't really tell anyone this, that sort of intimacy, that emotional intimacy, it's not just physical. Readily available information could be your name. That's readily available. But maybe something about your family or something you've experienced. That's cultivating a type of emotional intimacy that situationships are kind of known for. You might not even realize that you're in a situationship. And so I hope that this video allows you to kind of diagnose if you are in one. Situationships are not God's design for relationships. And the first point is that they are confusion and not clarity. 1 Corinthians 14:33 says, God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. Yet situationships thrive on mixed signals, unspoken expectations, and how could something that's not clear be from God? God is a Father who gives good gifts, who delights in his children, who is a God of peace, not of fear, not of anxiety. So if this unclear relationship, and we're not talking about, a good thing is coming in, so I'm scared of a good thing. That's a whole nother conversation. We're not talking about that type of anxiety. We're talking about anxiety that comes from a lack of clarity, this uncertainty, and then this panic that you have because you don't know what the other person is thinking. A man or a woman sent from God is going to be an imitator of Christ. They're not going to cause confusion in your life. Rather, they're going to bring clarity. And that's not to say that it's not going to be difficult and that you're not going to be met with things that you have to get wisdom on, but it's not going to be this prolonged talking stage where there's no sort of intention stated. We serve a God who gives good gifts, and so I know that a gift that's full of confusion is not from my Father. A relationship sent from Christ is going to point you to Christ. They're going to be seeking your spiritual well-being above anything else, even their own interest. It's not going to cause chaos or pull you away from Christ. A big issue that I see with my brothers and sisters in Christ is that we look no different than the world. We are to consider each other above ourselves. So that means that if you're having this prolonged talking stage just to keep company, you're essentially wasting your brother or sister in Christ's time. You're cultivating these emotional bonds and this emotional intimacy because, you may not be sharing something that you think is super private or super personal, but if you're saying, hey, please don't go around sharing this with someone, or hey, I'm sharing this with you, you are fostering that emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy or intimacy is not just sex. Emotional intimacy can also just be sharing information, again, that's not readily available to someone, and that is not God's design. God's design is not intimacy without commitment. God's design is commitment and then intimacy within that commitment. We need to consider one another above ourselves. You may not have an interest in that person, but you should consider your brother or sister in Christ above yourself. This leads to point 2. They come at an emotional and spiritual cost. They distract you from God's purpose and they cultivate compromise. Hebrews 12:1 says, "Let us throw off every hindrance and the sin which so easily entangles us." Situationships are not neutral. They do weigh us down. When you're constantly analyzing texts or social interactions with that person, it takes up a lot of your headspace, a lot of your emotional space as well, because that's what all of your focus is on. Your focus shifts from serving Christ to now figuring out if this person likes you or not. And that could easily become idolatry. And so I don't want you to play down things that, again, aren't intimate. What is our definition of intimacy? Our definition of intimacy is sharing information that is not readily available to someone else. So if you're talking about the future, if you're sharing information about yourself that doesn't even have to be that deep, but you're still cultivating that emotional intimacy, you are engaging in intimacy without commitment. That's going to leave someone hurt in the end. Ezekiel 14 talks about idols of the heart. These idols don't have to be in your physical presence to be an idol. A few months ago, I'd realized that I'd made myself an idol. I had made relationships an idol. You can make people an idol. You can make a situation an idol. Something that is consuming your thoughts more than Christ is an idol. So it's so important that we're taking inventory, and situationships can easily become an idol when you're overanalyzing and overthinking about this situation. Sometimes we justify it like, oh, this situation's different. This person's misunderstood. This person's going through a hard time, or it could develop into a relationship. But all of these thoughts are consuming your thoughts and your mind. They're fixing your mind on this situation that doesn't even have a commitment. That's just confusion rather than Christ. And I hear this all the time with Gen Z. Far too often we're chasing a vibe. How does it feel with this person? Are there sparks? Is there chemistry? And there's a whole nother conversation with that. I'm not saying there shouldn't be chemistry, but like Vodi Bakum said, we should be looking at character and then cultivating that vibe and then cultivating other things within that, not seeking a vibe, seeking a temporary feeling and then trying to justify their character. Because often we do that. Oh, I vibe with this person. We talk for hours. It must be something that's good. This is so unique, so rare. And then we try to justify their character and overlook red flags. We sprint past those red flags because we're already emotionally invested when we should be looking at, does this person imitate Christ? Does this person make me want to seek Christ more? And then working out the other things. A relationship that glorifies Christ is not just chasing an emotional high. It's something that's steady, not just this fluctuating up and down and push and pull and trying to play games and all of these things. That's not Christ. If you're doing mental gymnastics to try to justify this pseudo relationship or situationship or a prolonged talking phase that you're in, it's probably not from God, because again, God is a God of clarity, not confusion. Having intimacy without commitment is not from God. Number 3, situationships lead to emotional and physical hurt. Originally, I'd said situationships mimic that of a breakup, but even breakups and situationships mimic that of a mini divorce, because we're cultivating this level of intimacy without commitment that was never God's design. We see marriage in the Bible, and what is that? Sharing those emotional and physical connections. And again, intimacy is not just sex. Intimacy is sharing parts emotionally or just information that's not readily available to someone. That could mean something that is super, you think, harmless, but again, it's cultivating intimacy, privacy with that person. Again, could just be something about your life, something about your family. You're still cultivating that intimacy that's only meant within a marriage. That's why we end up so depressed after breakup, even situationships, because we have all of these emotional ties, and it's like we're going through a mini divorce, and that was never God's design. God's design for you is not confusion. God's design for you is not for you to go through all of these mini divorces until you get married. That's not God's design. We should be acting like they are our brother or sister in Christ until we are at the altar and say, I do. Often we hear, oh, the Bible doesn't talk about dating, so we treat it as a free-for-all. No, the Bible talks about marriage. That means that the standard is higher. That means that if you are even dating someone, that person is your brother in Christ. That girl is your sister in Christ until you say, I do at the altar. That means that you operate like that person is your brother or sister in Christ. Because why? Because that's God's design. Because again, when we cross those physical and even emotional boundaries, we're entering into this quasi marriage, this pseudo marriage. That's why it's so devastating when you break up, because again, God's design was for you to experience that in marriage. It's not just because, oh, God doesn't want you to have deep conversations. God doesn't want you to experience, that kiss, those butterflies. No, it doesn't want you to end up in this anxious spiral or in this depression because you cross emotional and physical boundaries with someone that you thought was harmless. We could be talking about harmless information or a harmless kiss, but again, cultivating that intimacy and then experiencing that miniature divorce and then ending up depressed and anxious. Like, that wasn't God's design for you. He wants your joy. He wants you to experience peace. He wants you to experience the beauty of marriage, not go through all of these 5, 6 miniature divorces until you meet your spouse. And lastly, they don't reflect God's love or intentionality. Philippians 2:3, God calls us to consider others above ourselves. If you are not pursuing clarity with someone, if you are truly caring for your brother or sister in Christ, you will provide them that clarity. Are you just passing the time because you're lonely, because you just got out of a breakup and you kind of want to entertain someone, or you like the attention, or there could be a plethora of reasons, but we are to consider our brother or sister in Christ above ourselves. That means setting those boundaries. That means that even if you're good, you don't know how the other person is. So set those boundaries. So I have a few questions to ask you to evaluate if you're in a situationship. This isn't comprehensive. It's just a framework that maybe you could think about if you go to a coffee shop, you're doing your Devo time, or you're just watching this video and you want to pause. These are a few questions. Have you cultivated an emotional or physical intimacy with this person? That being said, that intimacy doesn't have to just be physical. It doesn't even have to be a, explicit conversation. It can be just sharing information that isn't readily available to someone, cultivating that type of intimacy. Hey, this is something about my family. This is something about my life prior to Christ. Please don't share this with anyone. That's still creating that emotional intimacy. It's sharing information that's not readily available to someone else. 2, if you were dating someone else, would you be able to have the same level of closeness with this person? 3rd question, are you confused about the status of your friendship or relationship with this person? What is the fruit of this friendship or relationship or situationship? Is it peace due to clarity or anxiety due to confusion? Number 4, if you shared your text history or call history with a trusted friend, mentor, pastor, or even if it was blasted in front of your church members, would you feel embarrassed? Would you kind of be apprehensive? Or would you be like, fine, yeah, look through my phone? If so, that's a red flag, and it doesn't even have to be explicit. You know when you're kind of crossing those boundaries and flirting with confusion or flirting with sin. Number 5, has this person expressed feelings, or have you expressed feelings? And if so, If there has been no interest in pursuing a relationship for either of you, has there been steps back in that friendship or relationship to not deepen that sort of intimacy or cultivate that emotional intimacy? Are you considering the other person above yourself? So pause this, write those questions down, and go ahead and evaluate it with a mentor or someone who's discipling you. We shouldn't really look to our peers in this type of situation. Granted, we could have more mature and wiser friends, and that's totally fine, but I would encourage you to go to someone who's discipling you like a mentor. Often they can see the bigger picture.